Okay, so today I'm going to talk about love. What is love? Big topic, quite important to most people, perhaps all people. I've made some notes about how I'm going to approach love, but I often find about the problem about plans and notes, maybe this is just me because I'm lazy, if I am, is that they end up binding you into a different kind of confusion, because you feel obliged to follow these tracks when you are feeling at the same time that you don't want to. So it can create a sense of frustration and a certain confusion because you sort of have to exclude things which are coming into your mind and posing themselves as relevant at the same time as you're trying to follow this preordained trajectory. And I think sometimes thought develops in the very process of its presentation through language. So you cannot, in the planning stage, anticipate what's going to come into your mind, or it's more difficult to. But I've got the general thing. I'm going to talk about love in general, and then I'm going to go through the three main types of love according to the Greeks, which I think also informs our everyday understanding of love, which would be familial, and I'll group that with friendly love, friendship love, eros and agape. So what in love, in my opinion, this is not a scholarly academic treatment of what other people think about love, although I will consider the three types. What is love? Love, for me, is the most important thing in the universe, and when it is said that God is love, I think that's as accurate an understanding of God's nature as you can find. Obviously, there is the possibility that someone could come along and say, well, this is a kind of love here, does that mean that is God? Well, you could ask, well, is it really love, or is it pretending to be love? That's one question to ask. And if you could be talking about some kind of extreme sexual fetishism, perversion, and you consider that below, and say, is this God? Well, obviously I'm a panentheist, so everything is God in one sense. But if you're talking about a sadistic kind of love, in which one partner is genuinely not enjoying themselves, or even unconsciously not enjoying themselves, then I would delimit the sense in which we could talk about the presence there of God understood in the deepest sense. But obviously, saying anything is always an opportunity for people to come along and for the human mind, shall we say, to start playing semantic games. I am someone who believes that there are degrees of centrality and peripherality within God, but not necessarily in a Neoplatonic sense. I think that some things are more or less God, but not in a vertical hierarchical sense of the lowest levels being very, very distant from the interior in a linear descent. The essence of God can be found anywhere and can be displaced anywhere. But anyway, so God is love, and as such, when God is all present, in a vivid sense as opposed to a concealed, dormant sense, in the future, then everything will love everything else. There will be universal love between all particular features of the universe, or aspects, items of the universe. Is this a kind of nullifying oneness of indistinguishability without any kind of discrimination, distinguish, not in the negative sense of that word, but without any way of distinguishing things from anything else, and there's a kind of boring soup of over familiarity? No, not at all. Because it is precisely because everything is loved that everything is seen in its singularity and its difference, and insofar as elements and items are conscious and have a will, those life forms are, because they know that they are loved, they are emboldened to shake off their fear and to express themselves in their true authenticity and singularity. So the presence of love makes life more interesting and richer, not less interesting. Okay? Obviously, love is also something which would solve all of our problems collectively. Political problems to do with inequality, war, conflict, xenophobia, economic problems with regards to poverty and inequality again, social problems, conflict at all different levels between different groups and between individuals. So it is interesting, isn't it, that people in public life trying to solve problems never talk about love. Doesn't surprise me, but it is interesting. It doesn't surprise me at all because of the fallen, I use the word fallen heart that we have. Our hearts are indisposed to be vulnerable and receptive and open to the other, not just intellectually but in our affective everyday modality. We are defensive and frightened, and we perceive enemies and dangers in many places. So it doesn't surprise me, because of the knowledge of good and evil and the centrality of accusation in our attitudes, it doesn't surprise me that love is banished from public discourse, even though love is actually the thing that would solve all our problems that we're effectively wasting so much time trying to solve without love. So it's quite sad, really. And what also amazes me is that this sort of thing that I'm saying at the moment would be considered somehow, or might be considered somehow, kind of remarkable, extraordinary, or strange. Not at all. It's quite obvious. I don't think this is a unusual thing to say at all. And it's just it's sad that love, to a great extent, is relegated into two spheres, I would suggest. One sphere is private life, friends, family. And the other is abstraction, by which I mean principally things like ideologies, the love of ideologies, the love of art, also the love of nation, the love of activities like sport or dance. It's great that you love those things, but there's this cleavage of love into these two domains, private life and what I would call abstractions, which encompasses a sort of understandings of forms of activity, intellectual, behavioural. But what you're not allowed to do is love strangers and love your enemy, and try and understand how they are you, and you are them. Each of those in different ways, no doubt. You're not allowed to do. When I say you're not allowed to do it, it's not social praxis. It's not normal social practice to do that. Another thing, of course, that annoys me about the understanding of love in public life, the very idea of the understanding of love, apart from the fact that it doesn't belong there, is that it's somehow embarrassing and sentimental. And then this also touches on love's involvement in the private world. Is love sentimental? Is love somehow embarrassing? Well, yeah, I think the sentimentality is to do with people's alienation from their own emotions, and in love you get a sudden uprush of emotional intensity in a form of life which is not accustomed to that emotion, and so hasn't regulated that emotion according to any kind of intellectual reflection, and so it considers it to be overwhelming, and then fetishizes it and sort of idolizes it, and so you have this sentimental attitude where you are, in a sense, both too close and too removed from the emotion that you're feeling simultaneously. Because even though I say that love is amazing and extraordinary and very important, it's also should be, because it is very mundane and unremarkable. It's the very unremarkability of love that makes it so special. Because when you say something is amazing and extraordinary, what you're actually doing, ever so subtly, is banishing it from the here and now, because you're trying to situate it within a particular safe space of the amazing, the extraordinary, the astonishing. So sentimentality always exaggerates the importance of love in such a way as actually to create a space of freedom for ourselves from love, and by putting love, therefore, in some kind of controlled zone in your own understanding. As for the embarrassing quality of love, I think this is because when love breaks its boundaries as something which is supposed to be private and enters into the public domain in a way where it is understood that it does not belong. So when people express a certain degree of affection or vulnerability in contexts where it's considered inappropriate to do so, so it would then be considered both embarrassing and weak to be showing signs of love in such a place. It's also, of course, embarrassing within the context of dysfunctional, what could be called dysfunctional romantic love, unrequited love, effectively, in most cases, be unrequited love. So, Eros. Yeah, we're going to talk about Eros. Eros, I'm not really concerned about how the people in the past, scholars, have understood the question of whether or not Eros is romantic and sexual, or whether it could be only romantic without sex, or sex without romantic. But I'll group them together and say that my understanding of Eros is a form of, I would like to think of it in terms of romantic love, not sexual love, because sexual love can too easily be confused with lust, which is fair enough as another thing, can be dangerous. Romantic love would involve the quality of the heart and the affections and the mind in knowing someone and wanting to be with that person and spend time with that person to a degree of intimacy that is more than what is understood as friendship. And there is a quality of possession here coming into this, at least as it operates most of the time. And there's also, of course, a lot of hypocrisy and deceit around this question of possession, where people say to one another that they're not wanting to possess the other another, and yet, of course, as soon as the other person behaves in the wrong way, in other words, doesn't love them enough or starts loving someone else, then jealousy and reveals that it was always possessive. So what we can try and do with romantic love in this case is either we can force ourselves and really work on ourselves to truly be non-possessive in our love of the other, which will then allow that other to love other people and do whatever they wanted with those other people, and generally, if not just with those people, just with their time. Or we can acknowledge that love is possessive and acknowledge that the feelings of jealousy are natural, and not live with this difficulty. But I think this is one of the problems with romantic love in general, is that I think there's something to do with the intensity of the involvement and the blurring of boundaries between egos and the creation of a kind of meta self between the two, which is called the relationship. That you're always going to have possession, a sense of possession. And I'm not denying the possibilities of polyamory and all different possibilities like that. But I think that if you're talking about a kind of love that's not possessive at all, then you're talking about friendship. Maybe we can possess each other in a very free and open way. I mean, and then you've changed perhaps the meaning of the word possession. The possessive qualities of romantic love, or eros, is one of the problems I find with eros. The other problem is it's conditional. In other words, it's only for a few very select people, if only for one. Okay. By which I mean is, when I say it's only for you, people only want it with a limited number of people. You might say, well, that's just as well, otherwise, it would be diluted, or it will be just like insanely promiscuous and perverted if people wanted to romantically unite with everyone. Well, quite, I agree with this in a sense. Part of the issue, part of the character of romantic love, that it's both it's limited in its range, and it's conditional. So you have a situation where someone is only going to want to love very, very, very few people, and then of those that they're interested in, they might manage to secure one. And oneself is only going to be interested. I mean, oneself is only going to be the object of interest for, again, a very few, small number of people, perhaps. Although that might depend on your qualities of beauty and affection, beauty and appearance and status and role in society. If you're like George Clooney or Brad Pitt, you might have a lot of people erotically interested in you in terms of eros. So you can see I'm so far being quite critical of romantic love. I kind of almost think that it doesn't need to be said how rapturous and delightful and wonderful romantic love is in terms of its euphoric qualities, as it is a source of light, a kind of light that draws us out of this dreary, mundane world of fear and competition, and establishes a place for us with another, a kind of zone of freedom and light, subtracted from the everyday weariness of the world. So I don't want to eulogize romantic love. I don't think it needs to be done. I want to talk more critically about it, without trashing it completely. So we've talked about the conditionality of romantic love, and I want to talk about the reversibility of romantic love as well. This is linked to the conditionality, so it's reversible because people can stop loving each other in this way after a certain time. So you have to continue to keep up this ability to be attractive to the other, and if you don't, then people will leave you, however so politely, or if they don't leave you, they cheat on you, and that links in with the first point before. So possessiveness, conditionality, reversibility. The other thing, of course, about possessiveness is this whole concept of cheating. Because you are each other's possession, you're not allowed to sleep with or love anyone else. So reversibility. So you can be dumped. I mean, which is worse, someone cheating on you or someone dumping you? I mean, that's up for debate, perhaps. Some people might say that if your partner cheats on you and you don't find out about it and doesn't seem to love you any less for having cheated on you, then it's a non-issue. But I know that people pretend to want to know the truth about their partner, and if that is the case, well then presumably they should be told if they have been cheated upon. And can romantic relationships sustain the revelation of infidelity? Sometimes they do. I'm talking about monogamous romantic unions here. Polyamory is something which is interesting because it claims to be able to sustain what by other people would be considered infidelities within its very structures. But also you can have people who are just forgiving. They love their partner so much that they are forgiving towards infractions of infidelity. So conditionality, possession, conditionality, reversibility are qualities of eros to set against the rapturous wondrousness of its messianic qualities of endowing people with meaning and purpose. I want to kind of set to one side the evolutionary psychologist's understanding of the purpose of romantic love in terms of making of babies. Because because it seems to be short-circuited by lesbianism and homosexuality, where I don't know, but I think people feel the same kind of romantic experiences, but clearly this is not directed towards reproduction. So anyway, that's eros, and then there's the second one was storge, or philia. Storge, family love, and storge, storge, familial love, and filio for friends, and colleagues. I want to make a distinction between familial love, myself, just family, and then I want to talk about them each separately. Actually, friendship and colleagues, they're all kind of part of each other, and I would consider this to belong to the private domain to an extent, except colleagues is semi-twilight between private and public. It depends how closely you work together, but certainly family is extremely private. And one of the interesting qualities about how love operates here is the involuntary quality of the love that you find yourself situated within, in the sense that you don't choose these people that you find yourself having loving feelings towards, unlike the conditionality of romantic love, where selection is very key. Here, in familial love, it seems to be sort of, is it imposed upon you, or does it just rise up within you as a love that you find yourself feeling because your mother is your mother, your child is your child, your siblings are your siblings. And a lot of people speak about, however, about how taken for granted it is that this love is permanent and secure and always there. Well, in the best cases, yes, it is, and it is probably the best example within human society of a kind of unconditional love within the family, because it's so strongly rooted in the commonality of experience, and you could also suggest genes. But on the other hand, it breaks down. You have mothers who hate their children, who kill their children, and vice versa. You have brothers who kill each other. So let's not be overly sentimental and idealistic about the nature of familial love. But you certainly have the concept of a degree of unconditionality and irreversibility, which makes it different from romantic love. You still have this possessiveness, though, particularly from parents towards children as they're growing up. But other than that, it's less possessive. It's not so much possessive between brothers and sisters, perhaps brothers towards sisters in some cultures. And then let's move on to friends. Friends I would consider also be a private form of love, but it's different from family because you have selection. Absolutely, you have selection. It is less unconditional than familial love, but more unconditional or less conditional than romantic love. And you can have, for most people, you have more friends than you can have lovers. So in romantic love or erotic love, if I say erotic love, people will get confused. In romantic love, you tend to only love one or maybe two, perhaps secretly. In friendship, you can have many, but depending on what you mean by friendship, tend to have maybe a handful of good friends. But I think in the larger sense of friendship, people can have tens or 20s, 30. I mean, it depends how you define a friend with regards to degree of closeness, degree of sharing and involvement. But what I like about friendship is it's less conditional. You can fall out, but then it doesn't hurt. It doesn't matter if it does, and you can always make up again, perhaps. And it's not possessive in a sense that you really haven't, as a friend, you haven't become possessions for each other. You haven't challenged the boundaries between yourselves such that you have too great a sense of expectations. Although it can happen in the intensive forms of friendships that you have that quality of possessiveness. But it is different from romantic love because it's less conditional, less reversible, less possessive. But it's still private. It's not a public form of love. So it's still subtracted from the public domain, even though every friend was once a stranger in most cases. Unless it's friend, family friend. And then we have colleagues, and colleagues are even more on the boundary between the public and the private. The private, insofar as it's a private corporation or company that you're working for, and you're bound together through that. Another form of colleagues would be people you're involved in some hobby or society with, like caving society or hill walking society or a stamp collecting society or something like that. People like that. In a sense, it's colleagues because you're bound together by some specific activity or interest or work that is bringing you together, and in the context of that you can become close to one another and you can develop trust and loyalty and closeness. But it's different from friendship because you haven't chosen one another actually. You haven't selected to be colleagues with one another most of the time, unless it's a very small company. So you don't have the quality of selection. So it's a bit like familial love, actually, there, in a sense. And it has a certain equanimity to it because you haven't invested very much in one another emotionally. So it's going to be less reversible, unless you fall out over money, hierarchy, and places like that. But again, that's on the cusp, on the boundary between private and public. And then we have agape. And this is a specific form of love which is understood as the type that God has for humanity, and humanity has for God. And in its best expressions, it would be unconditional, irreversible, and non-possessive. Non-possessiveness would be the mere modality through which people would talk about, affirming the free will of the other. God's affirming the free will of humanity, therefore explaining the disasters and evil in the world. Problems in the Old Testament, we have a slightly interesting situation because here does seem to be possessive and conditional. Insofar as Israel is a special possession, and insofar as God punishes Israel and divorces Israel and drives Israel out of the land. So you have a qualified agape there with Israel, which is, for that reason, perhaps a little bit more romantic, if I could suggest that, in terms of the closeness. So agape, because it's unconditional and in its highest expression, or in its freest expression, is unconditional, irreversible, and non-possessive. And I like agape. I like agape for those reasons, although there might be this sense that there's a missing quality of the palpable, the wondrous, the intimate, that you would get in romantic love. So that could be something missing in agape, and I've even coined the expression agaperos as a fusion of the two forms of the noblest. Well, no, sorry, the two forms of agape and eros, and you could suggest that friendship, in a way, comes close to that, except that friendship is conditional insofar as people select each other. I think that might be enough about the different forms of love. But I would say that when we're talking about, I might just say a little bit about the public domain. The public domain is that order of life from which love has been excluded. And it's agape that is required in public life, because here you have no chance to select. You have to feel this love to everyone, and it has to be unconditional, and it should be largely irreversible, because it's a commitment that you make to the stranger, to your fellow human beings who you don't know and who you may not like at all. And who not only that, but may actively be wanting to destroy you. So it's a very different kind of love from eros, and philia or storge, because there may be absolutely nothing that binds you together at all with the stranger, and not only that, but it may be that the stranger is actively hostile to you, and yet I still suggest, yes, that you are supposed to love these people. So we're talking about love in a different movement. It has, oddly enough, it has something in common with the love of the parent for the child, which is very unconditional in that sense. So it's a love that's not dependent upon the behaviour of the beloved. So it doesn't depend upon how the person that you love behaves. It's not dependent on that you choose to love them. It's different, however, because it doesn't necessarily come naturally, this love. Yes, I'll put it baldly. Israelis should love Palestinians. Palestinians should love Israelis. Absolutely, this is what I'm saying. And this cannot be expected to be a natural love that would arise spontaneously, except, I would add, however, perhaps between particular men and women who meet, probably inside Israel, maybe in Jaffa, where they can mix freely, and the Palestinians are Israeli citizens. You can have some romantic situations going on there and friendships, but in terms of sort of the majority of Palestinians and the majority of Israelis, it's unlikely that there's going to be a naturally flowing up willingness to love. Although I might be wrong. I mean, I hope so. But I'm suggesting that that Israelis should love Palestinians and Palestinians should love Israelis. And the difficulty of that statement reveals something about agape, which is that it's not spontaneous. It's not spontaneous. And the unconditionality and the irreversibility of it is such that it cannot be relied upon. You cannot just expect it to come out of the heart. I think I've said enough there, but I want to introduce the word duty, this much maligned word. Yes, agape is a duty that we have towards the stranger and the enemy. And it's a very unfashionable word, because it's the opposite of desire, in a sense. The unfashionable word because it's linked to all kinds of patriarchal or oppressive models of submission to authority and self-sacrificing, which is opposed to the economy of desire and libidinal freedom, which is a characteristic sort of message and movement of the 20th century. But it is a duty because it's not a desire. Although, could it become a desire? Yes, exactly. And then you want to love the stranger, and you want to love the enemy. But this requires some kind of transformation in the heart, some kind of revolution of the heart and the mind, which people say is available to you through certain forms of spirituality. If it can be acquired elsewhere somehow, that's also great. But I do want to suggest that agape in public life, where it is most appropriate, is a necessity. We need it if we're going to solve our problems, and it is a duty that can become a desire. Perhaps a desire, if it can be turned into a kind of agaperos, where, or you could suggest agape philia, or an addition at least of qualities of intimacy and familiarity to agape, such that a personability and a responsiveness and an enjoyment of the stranger and the other can be enjoined, can be involved as well, to help motivation, so that it's not just a duty. But let's stand back from ourselves a bit here anyway, and acknowledge that, however unfashionable the word duty is, it does to such a great extent define our lives anyway. You know, the requirements we face to obey the law, to submit to our bosses at work, to follow authorities in all kinds of ways, and also to submit to members of our family and even our significant others who invoke a certain sense of obligation and responsibility and duty. So we already have in our lives the concept of duty. I'm just suggesting that that we need to feel this sense of obligation towards the stranger. And I think in general, if there was more love between strangers, then the quality of our private lives would be improved. Although that's a large leap of a statement. Because I think that they're two sides of the same coin, that they condition each other. The quality of our private lives determines the nature of our public lives, and the quality of our public lives completely shapes our private lives, because we are ourselves products of community, of language, of culture as individuals. So however much we may wish to be subtracting ourselves from the public in our creation of our little oases and citadels of privacy, in fact, if you look at the constituent elements and components of these private domains, they all show elements of public references and symbolic life. Okay, I'll leave it there. That's quite a long one, 35 minutes.